Zhou Shu looked at the surrounding environment, and his whole person was in a daze. Crossed? This idea is a little bit nonsense, Zhou Shu himself couldn't believe it. But facts speak louder than words. He really can't think of anyone who would play such a joke on him except for crossing. He obviously slept in his luxurious 20-square-meter bedroom last night, but when he woke up, he appeared in such a dilapidated farmyard. If someone was joking with him, the cost would be too great. By the way, it's impossible to find such a dilapidated courtyard in the city now. My own bedroom is bigger than this entire yard. Zhou Shu murmured silently, and suddenly a piece of messy memory flew roughly into his mind. The sudden encounter caused Zhou Shu to snorted and squatted down with his head in his hands. After a long time, the pain in his head gradually disappeared, and his eyes became clear again. Daxia. Foundry Division. Zhou Shu browsed the memories that emerged in his mind, and had a general understanding of his own situation. This body, also named Zhou Shu, has just turned 18 this year. The 3 generations of his ancestors were all craftsmen from the Division of Casting and Weaponry of the Ministry of Industry of Daxia. They were in charge of casting weapons. Both the predecessor's grandfather and father passed away early due to overwork, so the predecessor had just turned 18, and he inherited his father's business and became an apprentice in the Division of Soldiers. As a result, he was also exhausted from life and death, and Zhou Shu's was lost for nothing. Traverser. Forging soldiers, isn't it just forging iron? Zhou Shu looked at the living environment in this life while browsing his memories. The small courtyard he is now in is the residence provided to the craftsmen by the Division of Casting and Soldiers of the Ministry of Industry. Regardless of his family's ancestors, the 3 previous generations were all staff members of public institutions directly under the state ministries and commissions. A house. Before the death of his former parents, his savings were exhausted in order to treat the illness. In other words, this small courtyard now is the only place for this body to settle down. At least has a foothold, not to be on the streets. Zhou Shu thought comfortingly. Being in the capital is not easy. It's pretty good to have a dormitory. This yard adds up to 20 square meters. In addition to a simple bedroom, there is a shed in one corner of the yard. The underside of the shed looks like a blacksmith's shop. It was the guy who used to eat. The place to work and sleep together, this Zubingji is also a place to eat people without spitting out bones. Sure enough, as the bottom, there are leaks to be cut everywhere. Zhou Shu sighed inwardly. In fact, the treatment of the Division of Soldiers is pretty good. Even the lowest level apprentices like Zhou Shu can take care of the food and the living. There is a monthly salary of half a tael of silver each month. But it can't stand the intensity of this work. Take Zhou Shu's current situation as an example. The Division of Casting Soldiers requires them to hand in 100 weapons every month, which means that he has to cast at least 3 weapons a day to complete his mission. Otherwise, what is waiting for him is the punishment of flogging. His predecessor learned from his family, and he has been in contact with casting soldiers since he was a child. Even so, it would take 2 or 3 hours for him to cast a weapon. To cast 3 weapons, it would take 7 or 8 hours. This is still the case where everything goes smoothly. Actually, the success rate of casting soldiers cannot be 100%. Once they fail, they have to start again. Therefore, his daily work time is almost 8 hours. In other words, in addition to eating and sleeping every day, he has to work all the time to barely complete the task. It's not surprising that the predecessor will be exhausted to death with this kind of work intensity. Is it just going through, will you be exhausted? Zhou Shu wanted to cry without tears. With such an approach, he felt that he would not survive a month. If you want to survive, it seems that you have to find a way to become an official soldier. Zhou Shu thought in his heart. He signed a contract with the Division of Soldiers, and it is impossible to leave, but inside the Division of Soldiers, he also has his own way of promotion. He is now an apprentice forging a soldier, belonging to the lowest level of work, similar to a handyman. Above the apprentice, he is an official forging division. The Zubing division is already a technician of the Zubing division, and his treatment is very different from that of the Zubing apprentice. They can have a real residence, the kind with a kitchen and toilet, and their salary is several times that of an apprentice. The most important thing is that their work intensity is not as strong as that of an apprentice. For the casting division, as long as 30 weapons are handed in every month, the mission is completed. Above the casting divisions, there are senior casting divisions. Those people are the core talents of the casting division. Every senior casting division is the wealth of the casting division. Their treatment is better than that of the casting division. Much higher. Above the senior soldiers, there are great craftsmen. If the senior soldiers are the wealth of the soldiers, then the great craftsmen are the treasures of the soldiers. Every master craftsman is a national treasure level existence, that is not an exaggeration at all. In terms of status, the master can almost be equivalent to the doctor of the Zubing division. The doctor of the Zubing division is an official position from the 5th rank to Zhou Shu's previous life. It is equivalent to the deputy department level and the deputy mayor. One level. In fact, it is the doctor of the Zubing division, and he has to give 3 points to the masters. After all, there are many officials from the 5th grade, but the masters are very few. Above the master, there seems to be a more powerful caster, and that is not the information that Zhou Shu's predecessor can access. If you can become a soldier, the future is very bright, but becoming a soldier is not so easy. The 3 generations of Zhou Shu's predecessor were all apprentices of the casting division. Up to the predecessor, they had not been able to become the casting division. This shows the difficulty. If you want to become a caster, the condition is actually very simple, that is, a weapon that can cast in and out of products. The weapons of this world, UU reading www.uuganshu.com divided into heaven, earth, mystery, yellow 4, etc., Zhou Shu and other apprentices cast, are standard weapons, not classified. The secret recipe for casting the weapons is in the hands of the caster, and has always been secretive. Zhou Shu has no inheritance. It is almost impossible to become a caster. In fact, there is no one in 100 who can be promoted to the ranks of tens of thousands of apprentices. Is it possible? Are you really trapped here? Zhou Shu picked up a standard long knife cast from his predecessor and looked at it. He didn't know anything about ironing, and he didn't know the difference between standard weapons and imported weapons. What should we do? He is thinking hard, trying to come up with a solution from the memory of his previous life. Suddenly, there was a flower in front of him, and he saw a golden light, slightly dizzy, and a booklet with a blue cover appeared in front of him. On the cover of that booklet, there were a few quaint big characters written on it. Zhou Shu knew what they meant when he first saw them. God Soldier Atlas. Wow! The blue cover of the booklet was flipped without wind. I didn't know how many pages I had flipped, and finally stopped. Zhou Shu's gaze fell on the writing, and saw a figure of a long knife drawn on the writing. It looked exactly the same as the standard long knife in his hand. The figure was drawn very delicately and looked like a real thing. On the top of the long knife, there is a line of ancient characters. Sharp standard long knife. Just when Zhou Shu read the small print clearly, a message suddenly appeared in his mind. The casting method of the standard long knife. Zhou Shu's eyes lit up all of a sudden, and there was a solution to the dilemma before him. Zhou Shu has an extra piece of information in his mind, exactly how to cast a standard long knife. No, it should be the method of casting a sharp standard long knife. How to harden, how to forge. All the processes are exhaustive, even the angle of the hammer hit is clear. Zhou Shu felt as if he had gained countless experience in an instant, and even wanted to use a hammer to cast a sharp standard long knife immediately. The sharp standard long knife, as the name suggests, should be sharper than the normal standard long knife. Zhou Shu blinked his eyes, and the map of magic soldiers disappeared before his eyes. With the thought, the map of the gods reappeared in front of me. He tried to turn over the map of the gods, but found that he could only turn over the page of the sharp standard long knife. The other content could not be opened, nor could it be seen. I thought that the conditions for opening were not met. Based on the idea of planning and then moving, Zhou Shu began to study this sharp standard long knife. The standard long knife is the standard equipment for the soldiers of the Great Xia army. It belongs to the most common weapon. The sharpness and sturdiness are average. After all, it is only standard equipment for ordinary soldiers. I don't know how sharp this sharp standard long knife is than the standard long knife, and whether it can reach the level of a yellow weapon. Zhou Shu frowned and thought. His predecessor was just a simple boy who was immersed in work. He had never been in contact with the weapons, so Zhou Shu was still at a loss. First cast a sharp standard long knife and take a look. Zhou Shu made a decision, no matter how much he thought about it, he might as well roll up his sleeves and start doing it. The casting method of the sharp standard long knife has been branded into his mind, almost instinct has been formed. Without thinking, Zhou Shu threw an iron ingot into the stove. This iron ingot is a material for casting soldiers provided by the Division of Casting Soldiers. At this point, the casting division is still very generous. Anyway, the casting weapon cannot be taken out by the casting apprentice. The sharp standard long knife uses the same material as the standard long knife, but his casting method is very fine. There are strict regulations on heat, timing, strength, and angle. If not all these things were imprinted in Zhou Shu's mind, he felt that even if someone taught them by hand, he might not be able to learn it well. Ding ding dong dong. Zhou Shu held the hammer, a feeling of blood and flesh came to his heart, the hammer seemed to have become an extension of his body, and he swung it out skillfully. Although it was already night, there were beatings one after another around him, so Zhou Shu didn't have to worry about disturbing his dreams when he waved his hammer at this time. As the hammer danced, Zhou Shu seemed to have entered a wonderful state. In this state, he could clearly perceive the changes in the iron ingot as each hammer fell. He seemed to see the impurities in the iron ingot being beaten out continuously, the whole iron ingot seemed to have undergone a wonderful change, and every molecule seemed to emit light again. Zhou Shu's heart was calm, but he kept beating according to the secret recipe. The hammer drew a beautiful curve in the air, and then landed on the iron ingot from different angles. I don't know how long it has passed, Zhou Shu pierced a shaped long knife into the cold water of the well, and a white mist rose. Zhou Shu felt tired and dying, every cell in his body was groaning, his arm was sore as if he was about to break. But his expression was very excited, and he drew the long knife that had just been successfully cast out of the water expectantly. Clear water flowed down the back of the knife. In an instant, the long knife was not dripping with water, and the blade was bright and clean. Moonlight spilled on it, as if it had come alive, flowing endlessly. Good knife! Zhou Shu exclaimed loudly. To be honest, this sharp standard long knife looks like the standard long knife he cast before, except that it is slightly brighter, there is no other difference. If thrown into a pile of standard long knives, Zhou Shu might not be able to pick it out. But it's not important. I made it by myself. Is it too much to praise a good knife? A sharp standard long knife, can it cut iron like mud? Zhou Shu weighed his hands on this sharp standard long knife, his eyes fell on the standard long knife he had cast before, and he was a little eager to try it. After hesitating for a long time, he still didn't cut it off after all. It's hard to cast, if a gap is cut, wouldn't it be crying to death? Go to the military inspection field and try. A moment later, Zhou Shu took the sharp standard long knife, closed the courtyard door, and walked towards a part of the workshop. Along the way, there were clanging percussions everywhere. Almost all the apprentices were working overtime. The flogging of failing to complete the task was not so pleasant. Zhou Shu looked at the tofu-like apprentice house, and his desire to escape from the status quo became more urgent. If you don't leave here, one day, you will have to die in this slum-like apprentice workshop. He clenched his sharp standard long knife. Whether he could change his situation or not, it depends on it. The military field is a square in the apprentice workshop of casting soldiers. The weapons cast by the apprentices of casting soldiers need to undergo random inspections before they are delivered to the Ministry of War. The place of random inspection is this military inspection field. Even though it was late at night, there were still scattered apprentices in the military inspection field experimenting with the weapons they had forged. They also have no choice. The Division of Casting Soldiers has very strict quality control. If a weapon that has been cast is found to be unqualified, the whipping cannot be avoided. The soldiers' casting apprentices looked dull one by one, but they didn't respond to Zhou Shu's arrival. Zhou is not surprised, walked to a wooden stake, picked up 2 sets of armor from the basket beside it, and put them on the human-shaped wooden stake. Standard long knife is qualified to break armor, that is to say, can penetrate a set of armor. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com is considered qualified. The more layers of armor penetrated, the sharper the knife. According to the memory of Zhou Shu's predecessor, it is already the best standard weapon that can break through 2 layers of armor. A standard long knife that can break through 3 layers, never seen before. A sharp standard long knife, since it dares to be called sharp, at least it must be able to break through 2 layers, right? Zhou Shu murmured, holding the handle of the knife with both hands, and slashed it down at the stake. After a soft sound and a slight sense of blockage, Zhou Shu felt his hand lighten, and he staggered and ran out for a step, almost not flashing his waist. His movements made the soldiers' casting apprentices around who were testing their weapons turn their heads to look over. Mistakes, mistakes. Zhou Shu said to everyone apologetically. Click before he finished his voice, he suddenly heard a soft sound, and the wooden stake behind him, as if in slow motion, split into 2. The upper section slid down obliquely, revealing a smooth cut, 2 layers of armor set on the stakes, and fell to the ground at the same time, and a cloud of smoke was lifted. All the apprentices around had their eyes widened, as if they had seen something incredible. Break 2 layers of armor! Someone exclaimed. Are you blind? The stakes have been cut off. How many layers is this armor broken? Can the standard long knife cut off the stakes? Is it possible that this is a long knife that has been purchased? Quickly, inform Master Xiao. On the military inspection field, there was a lot of discussion, and a few more rushed away. And Zhou Shu, the instigator, stood in a daze, staring at the wooden stake that had been cut into 2 sections in a daze. You made this knife? A middle-aged man in his 30s of medium build, stroked the blade with his fingers, and asked. Yes. Zhou Shu mutely replied. His eyes moved up and down the broken wooden stake. A wooden pile with a diameter of almost half a meter was cut into 2 pieces by himself. Although this body has been ironed since childhood, it is still strong, but in terms of strength, it is only at the level of an ordinary adult. Is it because the knife is too sharp? This is unscientific. Zhou Shu feels that his scientific common sense has been provoked. No matter how sharp a knife is, enough force must be applied to it to cut the stakes. This is basic junior high school physics knowledge. But then again, this is not the Earth, and the laws of physics are different. Also, there seems to be that kind of peerless strong man who flies in the sky and hides. Your name is Zhou Shu? Xiao Zongshui continued to ask. Yes. Zhou Shu nodded. Your grandfather Zhou Guangzhu, your father Zhou Niandong. Yes. Zhou Shu didn't know what the subject meant, but he answered honestly. Xiao Zongshui is the chief of the workshop and Zhou Shu's immediate boss, who directly determines Zhou Shu's survival. They are both good styles, it's a pity. Xiao Zongshui nodded and said, you are also very good. Although this knife is not yet in product, it can be regarded as the best standard long knife. The best standard long knife? Zhou Shu was a little disappointed. It was just a high-quality long sword. It seemed that it would be impossible to use this sword to become a soldier. But the disappointment only flashed by. There was a map of the gods, and it was only a matter of time before he became a soldier. The best standard long knife is already powerful. How powerful is the weapon that has been purchased? Zhou Shu's heart's expectation of becoming a caster became even stronger. At your age, being able to cast the best standard long knife without a teacher is much better than your grandfather and your father. Xiao Zongshui looked at Zhou Shu and continued, maybe one day, you can become a real one. It may also be the founding division. Then thank Master Xiao for his cultivation. Zhou Shu said with his hands. I didn't cultivate you. Xiao Zongshui looked at Zhou Shu with a faint smile. Your father and grandfather don't have such a vigorous mind as you. It's no wonder that you can cast the best standard long knife. Master Xiao has been awarded. Zhou Shu was a little embarrassed, and he hadn't practiced flattering skills in his previous life. Okay, here I have done the work well. It's more effective than anything. Xiao Zongshui waved his hand and said, this superb long knife is of high quality, and one can compare to several ordinary long knives. In the future, you only need to cast this high-quality long knife, one can replace 3 ordinary long knives. After Xiao Zongshui finished speaking, he walked away with his hands behind his back. I don't know whether it was intentional or not. The sharp standard long knife in his hand did not return to Zhou Shu, but took it away. Xiao Pai Pei. After Xiao Zongshui walked away, Zhou Shu secretly took a sip. A sharp standard long knife, in terms of value, is definitely comparable to 10 ordinary standard long knives, but when it comes to Xiao Zongshui, it can only be worth 3, ah. After cursing a few words, Zhou Shu's heart that had been hanging around, also relaxed a little. A sharp standard long knife can replace 3 ordinary standard long knives. His original monthly task was to hand in 100 standard long knives, but converted to more than 30 sharp standard long knives. For Zhou Shu, the difference in the casting difficulty of these 2 long knives is not that big. In other words, his workload has actually been cut drastically, and he will no longer have to work overtime and iron. At the very least, the crisis of sudden death is lifted. Returning to his doghouse, Zhou Shu lay on the hardwood bed tossing and awake. After studying the map of the gods for a long while, he simply got up and went to the work shed to ding-dangling and busying himself. Soon after, a sharp standard long knife appeared in his hand again. Zhou Shu looked satisfied, and it seemed that he had indeed mastered the method of casting a sharp standard long knife. Zhou Shu was appreciating his work with satisfaction, and suddenly heard the sound of breaking wind behind him. He lowered his head subconsciously, feeling a strong wind blowing through the back of his head, and his scalp was a little painful. Boom! There was a muffled sound, as if something hit the anvil in front. Zhou Shu's back was instantly soaked in cold sweat. Just listening to the sound, you can also hear that the thing is full of weight. If it wasn't for hiding quickly, it would not have hit the anvil, but his head. Who? Zhou Shu turned his head abruptly and shouted loudly. You'd better not move. A gloomy voice rang in Zhou Shu's ear, I don't want your life, don't force me. Opposite Zhou Shu, a thin, tall man stared at him coldly, holding a hammer for hammering in his hand. That hammer is the size of an adult's head, and its handle is almost as tall as that of a man. If this thing is lifted. Zhou Shu seemed to see the scene where his head was smashed like a watermelon. Shivered all over, subconsciously squeezing the sharp standard long knife in his hand, which gave him a slight sense of security. Who are you, what do you want to do? Zhou Shu said loudly, hoping that his voice would attract the attention of the workers around him. Unfortunately, his plan fell through, and the jingling percussions around him did not stop at all, as if no one heard his voice. The face of the thin and tall man opposite Zhou Shu showed sarcasm. You don't have to work in vain. Before dawn, you will break your throat and no one will pay any attention. Zhou Shu felt a little bit in his heart. Although he didn't know why this man was so determined, he also knew that in a short time, I was afraid that no one would come to save himself. The money is under the bed, take it all if you want it. Zhou Shu pointed to the wooden bed in the room and said loudly. I am not interested in money. The thin and tall man's triangular eyes flashed with a fierce light, and he said coldly, hand over the secret recipe for the best standard long knife, I can save you. The tall, thin man was carrying a huge hammer and approached Zhou Shu step by step. Seeing him like that, he didn't worry about the long knife in Zhou Shu's hand. No matter how good the weapon is, it depends on whose hand it is. The thin and tall man obviously didn't pay attention to Zhou Shu. Zhou Shu's heart sank, rushing to the secret recipe for casting soldiers. A few hours ago, he only forged a sharp standard long knife. Is anyone tempted so soon? This is the workshop of the founding soldier, how dare he? The exposure of the sharp standard long knife was beyond Zhou Shu's expectation. If he had known that the knife was so sharp, he would never go to the military inspection field to test the knife. And he did not expect that this news spread so quickly. Not only the principal Xiao Zongshui immediately appeared and took the knife, but now there is also this guy who is obviously also an apprentice to rob. Zhou Shu stared at the tall and thin man. He didn't know him. The 108 workshops of the Division of Soldiers, the 97th workshop where he was alone, had hundreds of people, so many people. He couldn't have seen everyone. Even if he knew each other, it is estimated that this thin and tall man would not care about his peers. Boom! The big hammer in the hands of the thin and tall man hit the place heavily, making a dull sound. He looks extremely thin, but his strength is not small. The huge hammer is as light as nothing in his hand. A casting secret recipe that is not a purchased weapon, is it worth it? Zhou Shu clenched the sharp standard long knife, stared at the lanky man, and said, Hey! The thin and tall man snorted coldly. If it were the secret recipe for the foundry weapon, he wouldn't dare to it. The secret recipe for the casting of the incoming weapons, that is exclusive to the casting division, even if he snatches it, he has no ability to keep it. The secret recipe for the casting of this superb standard weapon will not attract the attention of the masters, and it has enough value to change your own situation. This is the most suitable thing for ordinary apprentices. The tall and thin man was not in the mood to explain this to Zhou Shu. He held the hammer handle, his eyes fell on Zhou Shu like a falcon, and said coldly, Give me the secret recipe. The secret recipe for casting soldiers is here, if you want, you can get it yourself. Zhou Shu pointed to his head. The next moment, he had already grasped the handle of the sharp standard long knife with both hands, preemptively, and slashed towards the lanky man. Zhou does not understand martial arts, you read www.yuyuganshu.com, but he is young and strong, even holding a sharp weapon, using brute force to smash, the power is also full. A flash of disdain flashed across the face of the thin and tall man. Although they were all apprentices, there was a gap between people and people. His ancestors were highly mentored and once learned a set of martial arts. Although he hadn't practiced anything in his generation, he still made him far more effective in combat than ordinary people. Zhou Shu's attack like this is fine to scare ordinary people, but is he an ordinary person? The thin and tall man sneered, his arms swung, and the sledgehammer was pushed up from the bottom up. He was confident that this hammer could knock down the standard long knife in Zhou Shu's hand and break his ribs by the way. Ding! With a crisp sound, the hammer and the standard long knife collided together. The thin and tall man seemed to have seen the standard long knife knocked into the air, and then Zhou Shu wailed and fell to the ground. His face showed a cruel grin. Suddenly, his smirk solidified on his face, and his eyes were full of horror and incredible. Boom! The sledgehammer fell obliquely to the ground, and a clear blood line appeared on the thin man's chest. The blood line continued to spread. After a while, blood poured out without money. How can this be? The tall and thin man left his last word in the world, and then fell to the ground in a sudden, dying. The sharp standard long knife you forged causes kills, rewards the exercises, and the dragon elephant is Prujnagong. The god soldier atlas automatically appeared in front of Zhou Shu's eyes. The page flipped to the page of the sharp standard long knife, and a line of words that looked like a barrage was swept across the page. Zhou Shu suddenly saw countless figures jumping up and down, and a huge amount of information instantly crashed into his mind. Click. The standard long knife in Zhou Shu's hand made a crisp sound and folds from the interruption. Half of the blade fell to the ground and pierced into the ground several inches with a pop. Zhou Shu didn't care about the damage of the long knife. All his attention now was on the information that emerged in his mind. Dragon Elephant Prujnagong. From the memory of his predecessor, Zhou Shu has long known that there is a powerful force in this world. But before he was even precarious to survive, where would he think about the unattainable things? He never imagined that under the circumstances before him, he would have obtained a set of cultivation techniques. After the weapon I cast kills the enemy, will there be such benefits? Zhou Shu's whole person became a little excited, and even the discomfort of the murder was alleviated a lot. If he used to think that becoming a soldier can change his destiny, now he understands that everyone is innocent and guilty, and only has the skill of casting soldiers without the power to protect himself. Becoming a soldier is not necessarily a good thing. The sharp standard long knife is not a weapon of the grade. It has already attracted the coveting of others so quickly. If it is a weapon of grade, what will happen? If it is another soldier with a strong background, maybe he is not afraid, but Zhou Shu can't. In this summer, he doesn't have any protective umbrella. What just happened is proof. He just took out a sharp standard long knife on the front foot, and someone on the back foot came to ask the secret recipe of the army. If it weren't for the sharpness of the standard long knife, the sharpness of the sword would be extraordinary. It is precisely because the sharp standard long knife cuts iron like mud, and even a hammer can cut it off, that thin and tall man would be caught by a single knife, otherwise Zhou Shu might not be his opponent. I will never let myself be in such a thrilling state in the future. Zhou Shu secretly said to himself. He is still a little scared after thinking about it now. This kind of feeling of life hanging by a thread, once experienced, he definitely does not want to experience it again. The sharp standard long knife you forged successfully kills, rewards 2 years of cultivation. Zhou Shu was thinking, and a voice rang in his mind again. At the same time, his dantian seemed to explode, a violent force gushing out of thin air, and that force instantly flowed throughout his body. Click. Zhou Shu felt as if there was a shackle in his body that had been broken, and a steady stream of power gushing from his dantian. His whole body seemed to be full of power, and even his eyes and ears were sharper than ever. Zhou Shu's eyes flashed, and he took a step, waved his arm, and the broken knife in his hand instantly slashed on the anvil in front of him. That anvil is what he uses to strike iron on weekdays. It is extremely heavy and hard to lose. There was a soft chirp. Such a heavy anvil, under Zhou Shu's knife, was like tofu, directly cut off a piece the size of a baby's head. Boom! The iron block fell to the ground, dusty. At the same time, Zhou Shu heard a few footsteps hurrying away outside the courtyard wall. Tonight is greedy, not only the thin and tall man, but he does it the fastest, and as a result, he also died the fastest. The death of the tall and thin man, and Zhou Shu's slashing power, directly frightened the rest of the unsuspecting people. It's too dangerous. Zhou Shu was afraid for a while. I thought this was the division of soldiers, there wouldn't be too much danger. I didn't expect that when people become greedy, they really have no scruples. Zhou Shu looked at the corpse on the ground, and was not too worried. The killer would always kill him. This person attacked him first, and he just passively counterattacked. This makes sense everywhere. Besides, Xiao Zongshui has just taken away his secret recipe for casting soldiers. Can he settle this small matter for himself? My sharp standard long knife didn't kill the enemy again just now, why did I get another reward? Zhou Shu put aside these things, pondered, could it be another one? Sharp standard long knife, he cast a total of 2. One of them was broken when the thin and tall man had just been beheaded, and another one was taken away by the principal, Xiao Zhongshui. He didn't kill the enemy just now, so it can only show that it was the knife Xiao Zhongshui took to kill the enemy. It seems that I am not only rewarded for killing the enemy myself, even if someone else kills the enemy with a weapon I cast, I can also be rewarded. Zhou Shu feels that he has gradually figured out the usage of the God Soldier Atlas. If this is the case, as long as I cast enough weapons to spread out, wouldn't it be? His eyes are getting brighter and brighter. Just cast 2 sharp standard long knives, he has already gained the Dragon Elephant Prujna Kung Fu and 2 years of cultivation. If we cast 200 sharp standard long knives, thinking about it makes people a little excited. Doesn't this mean that as long as someone uses their own weapons, it is equivalent to working for themselves? The 13th level of the Dragon Elephant Prujna Kung Fu. I have only practiced the first level in 2 years now. To achieve the second level, it takes 4 years, the third level is 8 years, and the fourth level is required 16 years. Under normal circumstances, I don't even want to cultivate to the 13th floor in my life, but there is a map of the gods, this goal is not difficult. The first level of Dragon Elephant Prujna Gong directly brought him the power of 1 dragon and 1 elephant. Although the power of 1 dragon and 1 elephant is an exaggeration, his current power, 1 punch and 1 kick, is in the hundreds. Jin's strength. If it weren't the case, his previous knife wouldn't have that effect. After all, no matter how sharp the knife is, it depends on who uses it. With the power of the dragon and the elephant, at least among the apprentices, he doesn't have to worry about anyone who can threaten his life. However, the apprentices of casting soldiers are only the lowest level of existence of the casting soldier division, and most of them are just ordinary people. In this world, there are countless people who are stronger than them, and the first level of Dragon Elephant Prujna Gong is far from enough. According to the scattered legends in the memory of the predecessor, this world is a martial world, not to mention the first level of the Dragon Elephant, even if it is the 13th level, it may not be invincible. Before I don't have enough strength, I will stay in the founding division to be safe. Zhou Shu secretly said, although there will be some ill-intentioned people here, they dare not blatantly mess around. And it's only here, only then can the weapons be cast and distributed openly. The weapons cast by the division of casting soldiers must be equipped for the use of the Great Xia armies, and the Great Xia armies are all combat troops. They fight countless battles on weekdays. When the weapons are in their hands, they will definitely not worry about the chance of killing the enemy. It is unrealistic to let all the 3 armies of the Great Xia army use the weapons he forged, but as long as hundreds of people use the weapons he forged to kill the enemy, then his gains are beyond imagination. If you stay in the Shijiji, Zhou Shu used the habits of previous lives to analyze the pros and cons of things. Before I thought that as long as I became a soldier, I would be given preferential treatment as a technician. Now it seems that I want to make it easier. This is not the peaceful age of the past life, it is the past life, and there are many people who do whatever it takes to benefit. The secret recipe for the foundry of weapons is something that can be passed on from generation to generation, and its value is immeasurable. Not to mention how I explained the origin of the secret recipe in my hand, just because I don't have any background, I don't know how many people will come to the idea of the secret recipe. The sharp standard long knife is only the best standard weapon. The caster may not be very impressed. If it is the secret recipe for the foundry weapon, the caster will be tempted. The strength of the casting division is much stronger than the casting apprentice. The first level of the Dragon Elephant Prujna skill may not be able to hold it. Therefore, you cannot be promoted to the forging division until you have enough self-preservation power. Even if you can forge access to weapons, you have to keep it secret. Zhou Shu analyzed the pros and cons of things one by one in his mind. There is a map of magic soldiers. He doesn't doubt that he can become a soldier, even if there is only one weapon in the map of magic soldiers. But from the current point of view, it is not a good thing to be promoted rashly to the founding division. First of all, it is a suspicious thing in itself that an apprentice for casting a soldier is suddenly promoted to a casting division without a teacher. Is just a standard long knife that shows its sharpness. Some people have already coveted it. If you rashly take out the casting secret recipe of the imported weapon, I don't know how many people will be moved by the wind. Zhou Shu doesn't want to be arrested for research and torture. Yu reading www.yuuganshu.com. Furthermore, he was anxiously promoted to the founding division because he was worried that he would die young due to overwork. Now he doesn't have to worry about this issue. The first level of the Dragon Elephant Pruchna Kung Fu, let alone his current strength, casting 3 or 5 weapons a day is like playing, exhausting. That is impossible. The task of building an apprentice soldier, for the current Zhou Shu, it is already easy to complete. Stay in the casting division as an apprentice of casting soldiers, and cast as many sharp standard long knives as possible to accumulate strength. Without absolute certainty, you can never be promoted to the casting division at will. Thinking over and over again, Zhou Shu thought to himself. At the same time, not far from the workshop where Zhou Shu was located, there was a mansion. In the courtyard of Hua House, Xiao Zongshui's wrist flicked, and the blood on the long knife fell to the ground, and the blade became bright and clean again. Not far in front of him, a black dog almost half a human tall fell to the ground, and the dog's head and the dog's body had already separated. Xiao Zongshui directly used a living thing to test the knife. He flicked the blade with his fingers, and the blade made a crisp sound. He nodded in satisfaction, and said to himself, "This knife is sharper than I thought." The normal long knife can break through a heavy armor is considered good. This knife can actually break through 3 layers of armor and kill the flesh and blood. There is not even the slightest obstruction. Forgive this week, it is really an individual talent. I had already given up my plan to fight, but I didn't expect to forgive me this week, but it gave me a glimmer of hope. Xiao Zongshui's face showed a thoughtful look. This knife may really work, but I can't say for sure. It seemed that some decision had been made. Xiao Zongshui flicked his sleeves, pushed the door directly, and walked towards the place where the apprentices of casting soldiers lived. Zi La Zhou Shu pierced the scarlet long knife into the cold well water, and the white mist rose and filled the whole work shed. The wrist trembles, the blade slashes through the air, and there is a soft noise. 1 hour. Zhou Shu looked at the long knife in his hand, with a satisfied look on his face. A sharp standard long knife was damaged and he recasted one. This time he specially recorded the time required for casting. In just an hour, he completed all the casting procedures. Before changed it took him at least 3 hours to cast a sharp standard long knife. After completing the first level of the Dragon Elephant Pruchna Gong, his army casting efficiency has increased by a full 3 times. The most important thing is that after casting a sharp standard long knife, he felt exhausted and had to rest for a long time before he could continue casting. And this time, he didn't feel tired at all, he felt that even if he cast a sharp standard long knife, his physical strength could be fully supported. The Pruchna power of the dragon elephant is stronger than I thought. Zhou Shu was delighted in his heart. If the firepower is full, I can now cast 5 or 6 sharp standard long knives a day. In this way, it is easier to complete the daily tasks of the division of soldiers. It only takes 2 or 3 hours a day to complete daily tasks. Is it not good to fish in the remaining time? Bang bang bang, a knock on the door interrupted Zhou Shu's reverie. Zhou Shu frowned slightly. Today is not the day to collect weapons. Who will come to him? Subconsciously glanced at the body of the tall thin man in the corner, he hadn't had time to destroy the body. Is it another unpredictable generation? Increased his vigilance in his heart, and Zhou Shu did not panic. Although it was only one night, he is no longer what he used to be. The first level of the Dragon Elephant Pruchna Kung Fu, and he has a sharp standard long knife in his hand, and he can fight 10 of them as an ordinary soldier casting apprentice. Hid the sharp standard long knife behind him, Zhou Shu opened the courtyard door. What time is it? Still sleeping? Why did it take so long to open the door? As soon as the door opened, the voice of the principal Xiao Zongshui had already reprimanded. Zhou Shu secretly cursed in his heart, what time is this? Converted into the time of the previous life, it's only 6 o'clock in the morning, okay? If you don't go to bed at 6, do you want to get up and work? Master, why are you here? Zhou Shu pretended not to hear Xiao Zongshui's words, and said directly. Xiao Zongshui did not answer Zhou Shu, and directly crossed the threshold and entered Zhou Shu's workshop. Zhou Shu was taken aback. Where else was the corpse of the tall thin man thrown away? I had known that Xiao Zongshui would come over today, so I should throw the corpse into the stove and burn it. I'm still a bit sloppy. He was thinking about it, ready to deal with Xiao Zongshui's inquiry. As a result, Xiao Zongshui only glanced at the corpse, and then as if he hadn't seen it, his eyes finally fell on the newly cast knife that Zhou Shu mentioned in his hand. Bring it! Xiao Zongshui shouted. What? Zhou Shu was taken aback and blurted out. Knife. Xiao Zongshui is a little impatient and authentic. Okay. Zhou did not hesitate, and directly passed the sharp standard long knife in his hand. If it was someone else, Zhou Shu would definitely not give it away easily. But the other party is his immediate boss, and the emperor of the 97th workshop. If he wants to kill Zhou Shu, it doesn't make any difference whether Zhou Shu has a knife or not. Xiao Zongxi held a sword soldier in his hand and slashed with a knife. A sharp knife flashed, and the sharp standard long knife hit the anvil Zhou Shu used for ironing. With a soft sound, the tofu square anvil was directly divided into two. Zhou Shu looked at the smooth-cut surface, a bit stunned. The sharp standard long knife was forged by his own hands, and he knew exactly what power this knife had. If an ordinary person holds a knife, it is the limit to be able to break the triple armor. If you want to cut iron like mud, it depends on the strength of the person who uses the knife. His own dragon elephant Prujna skill is the first major achievement, and his strength is far beyond that. Last night, he exhausted all his strength and only cut off a piece from the anvil. Xiao Zongshui lightly waved it and cut the anvil away completely. He really has kung fu. Zhou Shu had long suspected that Xiao Zongshui was not an ordinary person, and now it seems that he is at least stronger than his current self. The sharpness of this knife has reached the extreme in standard weapons, but the degree of sturdiness. Xiao Zongshui frowned and said. Following his voice, the long knife in his hand clicked and broke into two again. Zhou Shu's heart bleeds, but that was just forged by him at the expense of sleeping time. He originally planned to hide himself for self-defense. Scolded Xiao Papi secretly in his heart, Zhou Shu said, the principal is right. The problem that Xiao Zongshui said, Zhou Shu himself is also aware of. The sharp standard long knife is far more sharp than the general standard long knife, but the firmness is only average, and it is easy to damage if it is slashed hard. There are gains and losses, this is just a standard long knife after all. However, it is not easy to be able to cast such a sharp standard long knife with existing materials. Xiao Zongshui continued, Zhou Shu, you prepare and go out with the principal. Without waiting for Zhou Shu's approval, Xiao Zongshui threw the broken knife in his hand casually, and walked out with his back on his back. 1 foot has stepped out of the threshold, and he suddenly paused. Dispose of the corpse, don't leave it there as an eyesore. Half an hour later, come and look for me. After finishing speaking, Xiao Zongshui walked away slowly. From beginning to end, Xiao Zongshui didn't ask who was the tall and thin man, why he died in Zhou Shu's work shed, and who killed him. Although the thin and tall man died in Zhou Shu's hands, Zhou Shu's heart was also a little sad at this time. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. One life is gone, so no one asks more. This world is not the earth of the previous life. Here, Human lives are worthless. Zhou Shu was once again aware of the cruelty of this world. What does Xiao Zongshui want me to do? Zhou Shu felt a sense of crisis in his heart. His current dragon elephant Prujnagong is only at the first level, and it is far from enough to talk about self-protection. It should be related to the sharp standard long knife. Judging from Xiao Zongshui's performance, the possibility of danger is not high. Xiao Zongshui is the principal of workshop number 97. It can be said that in this workshop, he only covers the sky with his hands. In front of Zhou Shu, he does not need to hide anything. If Zhou Shu is to be disadvantaged, he needs to go around in some circles. Thinking carefully about Xiao Zongshui's every move, Zhou Shu roughly concluded that it shouldn't be a bad thing for Xiao Zongshui to look for him. After thinking about this, Zhou Shu's eyes fell on the corpse of the tall and thin man. Xiao Zongshui asked him to dispose of the corpse, how to deal with it. Throw it into the forge and burn the corpse? Zhou Shu really can't do it. He will have to use this stove for ironing in the future. How can he use it after burning a dead person? Bury it? Zhou Shu was panicked thinking about it. He buried a dead body in his yard. Would you like to sleep afterwards? Was thinking, a few handymen came to his yard, entered the door silently, lifted the body of the tall thin man and left. Zhou Shu didn't stop him, but he was relieved. It seemed that Xiao Zongshui was quite particular and sent someone to deal with the corpse. Solved a big problem, Zhou Shu simply washed his face, and then went out and walked towards Xiao Zongshui's residence. Don't talk too much later, do what I ask you to do you understand? On a carriage, Xiao Zongshui said in a deep voice. Zhou Shu sat across from him, nodded in response, understood. The carriage hurried forward. Although Zhou Shu was sitting in the carriage, his heart had already flown out of the carriage. Had Xiao Zongshui not been here, he would have stretched his head outside. It's been a while since I came to this world. Zhou Shu has never left the workshop of the division of soldiers. He is really curious about the magnificent scenery of the great Xia Emperor. In Zhou Shu's imagination of the imperial capital of Great Xia, the carriage ran for more than an hour before it stopped. Xiao Zongshui got out of the carriage first, and Zhou Shu immediately followed him and jumped out of the carriage. Entering the eye is not the prosperous imperial capital he imagined, but a wilderness. This is a valley with green hills on all sides. Not far away, a military camp stands there. Military camp. Zhou Shu's heart moved. The relationship between the Zubing division and the barracks should be that all the weapons cast by the Zubing division were supplied to the Great Xia army. What did Xiao Zongshui bring him here? Although a little bit puzzled, Xiao Zongshui has said before, don't say what you shouldn't say, don't ask if you shouldn't ask, so Zhou Shu didn't ask. He followed Xiao Zongshui, silently observing the surrounding environment. Came to the gate of the barracks, Xiao Zongshui was released after showing the token. In the barracks, groups of soldiers were training in full swing. The way of training seemed to Zhou Shu to be nothing surprising, just hacking. Xiao Zongshui seemed to be familiar with this military camp. He took Zhou Shu through the schoolyard and walked into a big tent. General Cheng, Xiao Zongshui, please see you. Xiao Zongshui raised his voice. Come in. There was a rough voice. Xiao Zongshui winked at Zhou Shu before entering the big account. Zhou Shu followed closely. As soon as he entered the big tent, he saw Xiao Zongshui saluting a burly general. See general process. Xiao Zongshui's posture is very low, his body is almost 90 degrees. This is the case with the boss at the head, and Zhou Shu naturally doesn't seem to be too lonely, so he can only concoct it in accordance with the law and hold his fists in salute. No. The General Cheng waved his hand, his gaze shifted from the sand table to Xiao Zongshui's body, somewhat puzzled. Master Xiao has gone and returned, so why? General Cheng, Xiao Mao came here this time because of weapons. Xiao Zongshui said. Of course I know that it is for weapons. General Cheng said, I'm dealing with you division of soldiers, what else can I do besides weapons? The weapons you brought did not meet my requirements. I would not choose your number 97 workshop to supply my army with weapons. General Cheng shook his head and said. Zhou Shu was confused when he heard it. How did it feel that Xiao Zongshui came to sell weapons? Is it necessary to produce and sell itself? Although Zhou Shu was an apprentice of the founding division, but to be honest, the founding apprenticeship was only the most basic existence of the founding division, and he didn't know anything about the operation of the founding division. The only thing he needs to know in the division of soldiers is how many weapons he needs to forge each month. As for where the forged weapons flow, the apprentice has no way of knowing. Dare to ask the general, have you selected the weapon? Not discouraged, Xiao Zongshui asked in a deep voice. Not yet. General Cheng shook his head. Workshop number 73, workshop number 86, and workshop number 89 have all sent a few weapons, but they are not satisfactory. This general was ordered to form the Imperial Guard to protect the safety of the palace. Naturally, the choice of weapons must be cautious. Zhou Shu was confused and could not ask questions. He could only guess silently in his heart. Zhou Shu knew something about the workshops mentioned in General Cheng's words. There were a total of 108 workshops in the Daxia casting division, of which the first 36 workshops were all composed of formal soldiers. There is even no shortage of great craftsmen. The weapons they are responsible for casting are all imported weapons. And the 72 workshops after the 36th workshop, including the 97th workshop where Zhou Shu is located, are all responsible for casting standard weapons. Different workshops are good at casting different weapons, some are good at forging swords, some are good at making guns, some workshops have mastered the secret recipe for casting spears, and some workshops are dedicated to making bows and arrows. The 97th workshop where Zhou Shu is located, is good at making knives. General Cheng's words made Zhou Shu also vaguely guess something. This General Cheng is forming an army, and the workshops of the division of soldiers are rushing to supply him with weapons. Contacting his previous work experience, it is easy to think, I am afraid that this supply of weapons is a fat man. Otherwise, Xiao Zongshui and the others would not come to grab it. General, the sword is the king of 100 soldiers, in Xiao Mao's view, it is the most suitable weapon for the Imperial Guard, Xiao Zongshui said. Before he finished speaking, General Cheng had interrupted him. I already understand what I said, Mr. Xiao, the knife you cast in workshop number 97 did not meet my requirements. The standard long knife you forged can be used to equip the ordinary army, but my guard is the elite of the elite. General Cheng, you have misunderstood. Xiao Zongshui shook his head, I know that the standard long knife I brought before is not in the eyes of the Fang family. So this time I brought a new knife developed by our number 97 workshop over the years. Oh! General Cheng did not show much interest. A group of apprentices for casting soldiers, not a casting division, can they develop any good weapons? Look at the general. The knife brought by Xiao Zongshui held it in front of General Cheng with both hands. Zhou Shu could see clearly that the knife was the sharp standard long knife that Xiao Zongshui had taken before, and he couldn't help rolling his eyes. How can the knife that I cast myself become a new weapon developed by Workshop 97 with great concentration over the years? What is the difference with this knife? General Cheng took the long knife with a lack of interest, glanced at it, and said casually. From the appearance point of view, the sharp standard long knife is no different from the ordinary standard long knife, and it is a single-edged straight knife similar to the Tang knife. Master Xiao, this general is very busy. If it's just a previous weapon, you should go back. General Cheng's expression was already a little impatient. The standard long knife Xiao Zongshui had brought over before, he had tried all of them, and they couldn't meet his requirements at all. If it were not for the unavoidable dealing with the Zubing division in the future, General Cheng did not want to be too stiff with the Zubing division, otherwise he would have driven Xiao Zongshui directly out. General, this is not the standard long knife I brought over. Xiao Zhongshui quickly explained, this knife is extremely sharp. Haha, General Cheng laughed, is the Chief Xiao amusing this general? A knife, not sharp, is it called a knife? General Cheng already wants to see off the guests. You have nothing to say, please try your sword. Xiao Zhongshui spoke first. General Cheng frowned and looked at Xiao Zhongshui. After a long time, he said, well, this general will give you another chance. Come on, come on. Soon, a few soldiers came in with a wooden stake. On the stake, there were 2 layers of leather armor. Master Xiao, if your knife can break the armor twice, why don't I use it? General Cheng said. Ordinary standard weapons, which can break through one heavy armor, is already considered an excellent weapon. Armor-piercing dual standard weapons, with General Cheng's knowledge, I haven't seen much. If it is a doubly armor-piercing long sword, equipped with its own guards, it must be qualified. General, add 1 more armor. Xiao Zhongshui said solemnly. Triple armor. General Cheng was taken aback, a little displeased. Master Xiao, it's enough. The standard weapon is cast with the most common iron material. It has 2 armor breaks, which is almost impossible to achieve, and it has 3 armor breaks. How can it be possible? General, give it a try, there is no loss to you, is it? Xiao Zhongshui said sternly. Very good. General Cheng squinted at Xiao Zhongshui for a while, waved his hand, and immediately some soldiers put another layer of leather armor on the stake. You come. General Cheng handed the knife to a soldier. His own strength is great, if he does it, he can't test the sharpness of the weapon itself. The soldier took the long knife, weighed the weight, and then cut it out with one knife. He didn't use all his strength, but controlled his strength to the level of an ordinary adult. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. This is also a rule for testing the sharpness of weapons. Only in this way, what is tested is the power of the weapon itself, not the strength of the user. The long knife drew a bright line in the air, and the blade fell on the leather armor. The solid leather armor, under the blade's blade, don't cut it like tofu. The blade of the blade is instantly submerged in the leather armor, and then deeply embedded in the wooden stake. Boom! There was a muffled noise, and I didn't know what fell to the ground. General Cheng's expression changed. He stepped forward and stepped directly over a distance of several meters. He pushed his soldiers away and reached out to hold the sharp long knife. With a slight force on his wrist, the long knife had been pulled out of the stake. Click! Triple leather armor, split from the chest and abdomen, fell to the ground, on the stake, leaving a deep knife mark. General Cheng shook his wrist, and the sharp standard long knife slashed across the wooden stake, and saw the thick wooden stake, as if in slow motion, the upper half fell diagonally, revealing a smooth, mirror-like cut surface. Good knife. General Cheng couldn't help but said, what a sharp knife. Master Xiao, this is the new knife you developed? What kind of knife is it called? Xiao Zhongshui hesitated, there is no name for this knife. Return to the general, this knife is called Hu Ben. Xiao Zhongshui was shaking his mind, and suddenly a voice sounded. Tiger Ben, meaning warrior. The voice continued, the general's imperial guard is on duty at the palace. It is the Tiger's man, the Tiger Ben knife and the Tiger Ben army, they are a perfect match. Except for the general's Tiger Ben, who can people be worthy of this tiger sword? Tiger Ben. General Cheng gave a smack, his eyes gradually brightened. Hebei knife, good knife, better name. General Cheng laughed. Xiao Zhongshui glanced at Zhou Shu somewhat unexpectedly. This week, Zhou Shu really kept surprises himself. Hu Ben Dao, the name is really charming. Master Xiao, who is this? General Cheng pointed to Zhou Shu and asked. Actually, he had seen Zhou Shu a long time ago, but he had always regarded Zhou Shu as Xiao Zongshui's follower. In his capacity, he would naturally not care too much about this kind of follower. It wasn't until Zhou Shu spoke up that he really paid attention to Zhou Shu's existence. He is the soldier casting apprentice in my number 97 workshop, and his name is Zhou Shu. Xiao Zhongshui introduced, this tiger knife can be developed, and Zhou Shu has contributed a lot. Zhou Shu was a little surprised. He didn't expect Xiao Zhongshui to speak like this. He had already prepared Xiao Zhongshui to take the sharp standard long knife as his own. After all, he was the owner of the workshop. Unexpectedly, Xiao Zhongshui would actually give him the credit. Although what he said was the contribution he made, he did not say that the sharp standard long knife was developed by Zhou Shu himself, but this is already very good, and Zhou Shu will not ask for more for the time being. Oh, is it so? General Cheng didn't doubt anything, nodded and said, it's a manufacturable material. This is a polite remark, asking Zhou Shu's identity because of what Zhou Shu said before. He did not intend to have a deep friendship with Zhou Shu. After asking Zhou Shu's name, General Cheng turned to Xiao Zhongshui. Lord Xiao, what is the cost of this tiger knife? General Cheng loved Hu Bendao and asked. The cost of a tiger knife is more expensive than an ordinary long knife. Xiao Zhongshui groaned, a knife, the cost is 2.5 silver. 3 and 2. General Cheng's eyebrows twitched. Zhou Shu was a little stunned to hear it, 3 taels of silver, this is a money grab. Tiger Ben knife, that is, a sharp standard long knife, was cast by Zhou Shu himself, and he knew exactly how much it cost. The cost is just a few kilograms of iron, and other costs are basically negligible. Although the price of iron is not cheap, the cost of a tiger knife is not even a tael of silver. If you include coal and the wages of an apprentice for casting soldiers, the cost of a tiger knife is less than a tael. If you change hands, you will quote a high price of a few taels of silver. Why is this not stealing money? Zhou Shu's good impression on Xiao Zhongshui just disappeared immediately. This Xiao peeled his skin. His task in 1 month was to forge 30 tiger swords and a couple of silver. That would be 90 taels. How much is his monthly salary? Half a tael of silver. Can eat people without spitting out bones. 3 or 2, for this tiger knife, it's not too expensive. General Cheng muttered, this tiger knife, how much can you take out every month? General Cheng is also an expert, concerned about the completion cost, and began to care about the output. He wants a tiger knife, which is used to equip the army. If the number is too small, it will not make much sense. It's not easy to cast a tiger's Ben knife. Zhou Shu is already the best skilled apprentice in our number 97 workshop. He came to cast this tiger's Ben knife and it would take more than 2 hours to cast one. Xiao Zhongshui pointed at Zhou Shu, then buttoned him a top hat. Zhou Shu rolled his eyes, just put on a hat on me, you have the ability to increase my wages. The casting of the tiger's cardinal knife is much more complicated and difficult than the normal standard long knife. In the entire 97th workshop, the apprentices who can cast the tiger's card knife can be counted with both hands. Xiao Zhongshui opened his eyes and talked nonsense. The sharp standard long knife was in the hands of Zhou Shu. Apart from him, no one else in the 97th workshop could cast it. General Cheng didn't know this and didn't care about it. Just tell me, if I want 3,000 tiger swords, how long will it take you to hand it in? Zhou Shu casts a knife by himself, but he can only cast 1 tiger sword a day, 3,000, that would take 10 years. Obviously, it is impossible for General Cheng to wait 10 years. 3,000. Xiao Zhongshui smiled and said in deep thought, half a year, no, 3 months. As long as 3 months, I can deliver 3,000 tiger swords. Zhou Shu already wanted to curse in his heart, what does Xiao Pipi mean? 3,000 tiger swords were delivered in 3 months, 1,000 would be cast in 1 month, and 30 in a day. He can't cast it to death. Very good. General Cheng nodded, within 3 months, if you can deliver 3,000 tiger swords, then my tiger army's saber will be it in the future. General Cheng flexed his fingers and flicked the blade, and the blade buzzed and shook with a clear cry. He is also a shameless, the name Hu Ben was directly used by him. These people do not pay copyright fees. Zhou Shu complained in his heart. From the conversation between the two, Zhou Shu already knew that General Cheng was now in charge of forming a new janitor army. The number had not yet been determined. It's better now. He directly took the name of the Hu Ben army. So, thank you General. Xiaozong Shui was overjoyed. 3,000 tiger swords, that's 9,000 taels of silver. This is a big business. If you remove the cost, you can not only make a lot of money, but also gain performance. It is not impossible to rise one more level. Thank me in no hurry. General Cheng shook his head and said, I have seen the tiger knife. Now you have to prove that this tiger knife was really made by your number 97 workshop. Don't be fooled by the general who you got a knife from the hand of a caster, and in the end all the long swords of ordinary standard were delivered. General Cheng seems to be experienced, and he is worried that the sample is inconsistent with the final product. Xiaozong Shui seemed to have expected it a long time ago, and said with a smile, that's natural. Xiao Mao specially brought Zhou Shu over this time, he is going to cast a tiger knife for the general in person. Zhou Shu realized that Xiaozong Shui brought him to the barracks just to make him a tool man. In the barracks, there is no shortage of fuel and iron, and even smelting furnaces are readily available. It is also necessary to repair damaged weapons in military camps. After all, new weapons cannot be supplied from time to time. Zhou Shu knows his identity. He is just a hitman. Whatever the boss says, he will do. Honestly cast a sharp standard long knife in front of everyone. When was casting, he deliberately reduced his strength, and it took longer than last time to cast the knife in front of Xiaozong Shui. It took 3 hours to complete the casting. The General Cheng asked him to take the knife. This time he personally tried the knife and made sure that he was still able to break the armor 3 times before the smile appeared on his face again. Good. General Cheng laughed and said, with this tiger knife, the strength of my tiger army will increase by 30% out of thin air. This time, I finally live up to the hope of the holy. Master Xiao, this time, you have done a great job. They are all serving the court, this is Xiao Mao's own business. Xiaozong Shui laughed and turned into a flower. Master Xiao, I want this tiger knife. After General Cheng laughed, his face became serious, but I have one condition. General, please speak. Xiaozong Shui also narrowed his smile, and said sternly. This tiger knife can only be supplied to my tiger army in the future, and cannot be used for other purposes. General Cheng said word by word. If you can do this, I will give you 4 taels of silver for each tiger's knife. If you can't, then assume you haven't been here today. Xiaozong Shui's eyes narrowed slightly, and the workshop of the division of soldiers has a lot of autonomy. Each knife is 4 taels of silver, and the cost is what Xiaozong Shui casually reported. Even if you pay 2 or 2 to the division, the remaining 2 and 2 fall into the bag, which is a lot of money. Just. General, is this unruly? Xiaozong Shui hesitated. Rules. General Cheng sneered twice. Mr. Xiao, this secret recipe for the tiger's knife was developed by your own at the 97th workshop. According to the rules of the Division of Casting and Soldiers, you have the right to dispose of it, don't you? As long as the casting secret recipe is not handed over to the Zubing Division, it is your private property. You have the final say how to deal with it. Then, the general bought the secret recipe for the tiger's knife, and then commissioned the 97th workshop to cast it. Is this in compliance? Zhou Shu, you wait for me outside, I have important discussions with General Cheng. Xiaozong Shui did not answer, but first drove out Zhou Shu, who was dumbfounded. Until he walked out of the big tent, Zhou Shu never recovered from reading www.yuyuganshu.com. These guys really know how to play. Isn't this the country wool? No, these two guys also smashed their own wool. Zhou Shu was a bit aggrieved, but the secret recipe for the tiger's knife was his, not from workshop number 97, let alone Xiaozong Shui's. According to the rules of the Zubing division, if you hand in the casting secret recipe, you will get a reward, but then, the casting secret recipe belongs to the Zubing division. Of course, he can also choose not to hand in the casting secret recipe, but to hand in weapons. Both methods have their pros and cons, and it is impossible to talk about which is better and which is worse. Now that fellow Xiaozong Shui directly claimed the secret recipe of the tiger's knife for himself. Isn't this an open grab? Why did he make the decision to sell the secret recipe of the tiger's knife to this general? Zhou Shu looked back at the big account. Well, it seems that he really has no room for resistance. A soldier casting apprentice, whether it is Xiaozong Shui or General Cheng, can crush himself to death at will. Like the thin and tall man who attacked and killed Zhou Shu before, no one asked more questions after he died. However, I'm afraid that Xiaozong Shui and General Cheng didn't know. They thought it was their own wool, but they didn't know that they could come back. 3,000 tiger swords, all equipped with combat troops, how much feedback will it bring to yourself? How much improvement can you bring to yourself? If they didn't do this, Zhou Shu really didn't know how to distribute the weapons he had forged to so many people. It's just a sharp standard long knife. You want it? I just give it to you. I don't like it. Zhou Shu said to himself, but I've written down this matter. Sooner or later I will let you know that it's cheap. So good. Do you have any questions you want to ask me? Xiaozong Shui looked at Zhou Shu and asked blankly. Zhou Shu and his genius were bright when they left the workshop of the division of soldiers. Now they are leaving the barracks, the sky is all dark. Unknowingly, they stayed in the barracks of the Tiger Army for a whole day. No. Zhou Shu shook his head firmly. Later, Xiaozong Shui and General Cheng had a chat in the big tent. He didn't know, and he didn't want to know. To be a hitman, you must have the consciousness of hitting a worker. Knowing too much may not be a good thing. Really not. A hint of irony flashed in Xiaozong Shui's eyes, and he continued. You must be thinking, the secret recipe for the tiger's knife is clearly yours, why did you become the number 97 workshop? I do not. You don't need to deny it, whoever changes it will think so. Xiaozong Shui interrupted Zhou Shu's words and said, I tell you, it's me, Xiaozong Shui, is the principal of workshop No 97. Zhou Shu was speechless. Xiao Papi got cheap and sold well. You don't need to be angry. Xiaozong Shui didn't care about Zhou Shu's reaction at all, and continued, this is the way in this world. You can't keep the tiger knife in your hand, even if you cast the secret recipe. Turn it in, and still have to pass through my hand. Actually, you should be thankful that General Cheng can see this tiger knife. I tell you the truth, the reward you can get by submitting the secret recipe for the tiger's knife to the division, is only a few dollars in the monthly salary. Now, my main business is not a person who eats alone. Your benefits are indispensable. Xiaozong Shui was very straightforward, and in the end he did not forget to draw a cake for Zhou Shu. Zhou Shu knew that what he was talking about was reality. The secret recipe of the tiger's knife was left in his hands, and it would not bring him much benefit. On the contrary, he might be innocent and guilty. His current strength is still too weak after all. As for the benefits that Xiaozong Shui said, Zhou Shu didn't take it seriously. In his last life, he saw too many big cakes drawn by the boss in the vernacular. How many of them really realized? This is a silver bill of 100 taels, which can be cashed anywhere in Daxia. Xiaozong Shui took out a silver ticket from his arms and threw it into Zhou Shu's arms. He opened his mouth wide, looking back, you write down the secret recipe for the tiger's knife and give it to me. Xiao Zongshui never considered Zhou Shu's rejection. In fact, Zhou Shu couldn't refuse. The first level of cultivation of the dragon elephant Prujnagong may not have beaten Xiao Zongshui. Although he felt a little bit aggrieved, but if he had money, he didn't want to be a bitch. He still collected the 100 taels of silver bills. He now has a monthly salary of half a tael, and 100 tael, which is equivalent to his 20 year salary. Xiao, this bastard, didn't know that he had made tens of thousands of taels of silver from General Cheng, and he would have sent himself 100 taels of silver? Wait, let you know sooner or later, free is the most expensive. Zhou Shu cursed secretly in his heart. By the way, are you literate? Xiao Zongshui suddenly remembered something and asked. Most of the apprentices in casting soldiers were born in poverty, and illiterate people abound. Get to know some. Zhou Shu thought for a while. His predecessor did indeed go to private school for 2 years. It's good to be literate, don't forget to write down the secret recipe for casting soldiers. Xiao Zongshui nodded and said, do it hard, I won't treat you badly. Xiao Zongshui intimately asked the coachman to send Zhou Shu back to the workshop, but he himself got off the car in the city, not knowing which hook column he went to listen to the song. With a large sum of 100 taels of silver, he returned to his work shed. Zhou Shu could only sigh as he looked at the shabby residents of the slum. He signed a contract with the casting division. Until the contract time expires, unless he is promoted to the casting division, he will have to stay here. Promoted to a casting division? After seeing the activities of Xiao Zongshui and General Cheng, he couldn't guarantee what the consequences would be if he casted and exported weapons. I'm afraid Xiao Zongshui has robbed him of the secret formula for the casting of the weapon before he was promoted to the casting division. After all, the value of the secret recipe for the foundry weapons is definitely not comparable to that of a tiger knife. As for the status and respect of the caster, it must be a recognized caster. A new soldier who is not known to outsiders, you can know how Xiao Zongshui will treat him if you think about it. The sharp standard long knife you forged successfully kills, rewards 2 years of cultivation. While Zhou Shu was thinking about the way forward, suddenly the map of the gods appeared automatically, the page of the book was turned, the page of the sharp standard long knife was opened, and a line of barrage flashed on the page. A stream of heat rushed into his body instantly, and he felt his body swell for a few minutes. After a few breaths, he returned to normal. An additional 2 years of cultivation base. Zhou Shu was overjoyed, he was indeed a fighting force, and surprised himself so quickly. When he and Xiao Zongshui left the Huban army camp before, the 2 Huban knives were left with General Cheng. Unexpectedly, they would kill the enemy with a tiger knife so quickly. I just don't know if they killed people or animals. Zhou Shu's gaze fell on the page, and on the page with a sharp standard long knife drawn, there were a few more small prints after the title. Upon closer inspection, it was a number 2. After thinking about it for a moment, Zhou Shu has come to understand that this should mean that there are 2 sharp standard long knives that he has cast. Actually, after obtaining the casting secret recipe, he not only cast 2 sharp standard long knives, but some of them were damaged later, and they are still intact now, only the 2 left in the Tiger Army. The Tiger Armies are the Imperial Guards and have relatively few opportunities to fight. If it is a frontier army, then it is a war machine. Zhou Shu smacked his lips with some meaning, the feeling that his cultivation base has soared is really cool. But he still hasn't been able to send the weapons he forged to the frontier army, so he can only think about it. As long as I stay in the division of casting soldiers, sooner or later I will be able to cast weapons throughout the Great Xia army. By then Zhou Shu couldn't help but chuckled. How does it feel for thousands of people to help themselves with practice? Cool? Still cool? I feel a little excited when I think about it. But Zhou Shu also knows that it is not easy to do this. The Great Xia army, slaying demons, and protecting the country. Slashing demons and slaying demons. Second army dealt with powerful demons. They are also powerful warriors themselves, and all they use are high-quality weapons. Those weapons were all supplied by the casting division in the first 36th workshop of the casting division. The National Protector Army is an ordinary army, and the Tiger Ben Army is one of the National Protector Army. The weapons cast by Zhou Shu's apprentices can only be supplied to the Protectorate Army. He wanted to make his forged weapons spread all over the great Xia armies, at least it would be possible to become a soldier. This matter is not in a hurry, just the national defenders, which will be enough for him to work for many years. Xiao Zongshui promised that General Cheng would provide 3,000 tiger swords in 3 months. 3,000, one person is definitely not enough, he should choose a group of people to participate in the casting. What Xiao Zongshui would do, Zhou Shu didn't care too much, and he wouldn't pay for himself. What Zhou Shu cares about is how much he can take this opportunity to put the tiger knife he has cast into it. Now if he has full firepower, he can cast 5 tiger knives a day. In this case, a month is 150, and in 3 months, he can even cast 500 tiger knives. But if he really took out so many tiger swords www.mtlnovel.com, it would expose his own strength. When the time comes, it will be troublesome if it attracts the attention of a caring person. Generally, apprentices for casting soldiers rush to work with all their strength, and casting 2 tiger knives every day is not a big problem. As the creator of the tiger sword, I must have a better casting level. I work overtime every day to cast 3 tiger swords, isn't it strange? 3 handfuls a day, 90 handfuls a month, 270 handfuls for 3 months. More than 200 knives, if you kill the enemy at the same time, you can feed back 500 years of cultivation at a time. Zhou Shu was a little excited to sing. 500 years of cultivation, how many levels can his dragon elephant Prajna power rise? The first layer needs 2 years of cultivation, the second layer needs 4 years, the third layer needs 8 years, the fourth layer needs 16 years, and the fifth layer needs 32 years. With his not very good arithmetic level, for a time, he couldn't calculate how many levels of the dragon elephant Prajna skill can be raised by the 500 YEAR cultivation base. It doesn't matter. Anyway, if you can cultivate for 500 years, you will definitely become stronger. Zhou Shu simply didn't bother to calculate. At that time, if you don't say anything else, it should be okay to abuse Xiao Zongshui. This is the correct use of the map of the gods. How great can you be a soldier by relying on the secret recipe for casting? It's cool enough to use it to improve your cultivation. Zhou Shu rolled up his sleeves and raised his hammer enthusiastically. Sleep? What sleep? Casting soldiers makes me happy, I love casting soldiers. Thinking that his cultivation level would skyrocket soon, Zhou Shu felt that the hammer in his hand was much lighter. The percussion of ding ding dong dong, like a passionate music, echoed in the simple work shed. Or not. Xiao Zongshui's face was so gloomy that water was dripping. Not far in front of him, a middle-aged man knelt on the ground in panic. Master, we did our best. Xiao Zongshui waved his hand, motioning him to go out. The middle-aged man kowtowed his head and ran out in a panic, looking like he had survived the disaster. Xiao Zongshui didn't care about the middle-aged man's reaction. He frowned and stared at the piece of paper in front of him. That piece of paper was surprisingly the secret recipe for the tiger's knife that Zhou Shu gave him. After getting the secret recipe, Xiao Zongshui did not disclose the secret recipe in the 97th workshop as Zhou Shu wanted. Instead, I found some skilled soldier casting apprentices. 3,000 tiger swords are not too much work for a workshop. After all, there are hundreds of casting divisions in a workshop, and there are tens of thousands of standard long swords cast every month. In Xiao Zongshui's view, even if the tiger's knife is a little troublesome for casting, it can complete the task within 3 months with a dozen or 20 soldiers casting apprentices. As a result, he found multiple apprentices for casting soldiers, but he couldn't successfully cast the tiger sword. Is there something wrong with this casting recipe? Xiao Zhongshui said to himself. Zhou Shu has the courage. He paced back and forth. After a long while, Xiao Zhongshui took the casting secret recipe into his arms and pushed out the door. Soon after, Xiao Zhongshui came to the door of a Chinese house and stuffed a coin of silver into the hand of the concierge with a smile on his face. Please inform us, Xiao Zhongshui, the owner of workshop number 97, please see Master Zhu. If an apprentice from workshop number 97 saw this scene, they would not believe that this man with a smile on his face would be Xiao Zhongshui. Master Xiao, who covered the sky in the 97th workshop, also had such a time when he whispered for help. The doorman's nostrils were upturned, with a look of arrogance. He squinted at Xiao Zhongshui, weighed the weight of the silver in his sleeve, and nodded slightly. Wait! Turned around and stepped through the door. After a full quarter of an hour, the other party returned again, with his hands behind him, looking at the sky at a 45-degree angle, and said, "Go in, the master is waiting for you in the study. Remember, you only have time for a stick of incense." "Thank you." Xiao Zhongshui arched his hands and said, stepping across the threshold and walking quickly towards the study room. The time for an incense stick, but not much. After a while, Xiao Zhongshui had already arrived at the study following the instructions of the concierge. In the study room, a man who looks like a 40 or 50-year-old was flipping through a book. He heard Xiao Zhongshui coming in. The man said without looking up, "Master Xiao is coming here, what can I advise?" "Don't dare." Xiao Zongshui's posture was very low, and he quickly said, "I'm here to disturb Master Zhu. I want Master to help him look at the secret recipe of Zhang's casting. I beg you to ask the Master for help. Is there any problem with this casting recipe?" Then Master Zhu raised his head and looked at Xiao Zhongshui, frowning insignificantly. "That's it. Xiao knows that the Master is busy, but the matter is urgent. Xiao really has no time to find another caster." Xiao Zhongshui smiled bitterly, "Master, don't worry, I understand the rules." While speaking, Xiao Zhongshui handed over a large silver ticket with both hands. "Ask an expert to do something, this is an expert fee." Master Zhu glanced at the banknote that Xiao Zhongshui had put on the table, and did not reach for it, but his expression softened slightly. "Where is the secret recipe? Bring it." Xiao Zhongshui hurriedly took out the secret recipe for the tiger's knife and handed it over. Master Zhu just glanced at it, and then said a little unpleasantly, "Lord Xiao, although you and I have some friendship, but you brought a secret recipe for casting of inferior weapons, are you going to slap the old man in the face?" Master misunderstood. Xiao Zhongshui quickly explained. Master Zhu is not an ordinary soldier, he is one of the few master craftsmen in Daxia, and his position is extremely respected. Don't say the secret recipe for the casting of the graded weapons, even if it is a general graded weapons, Master Zhu is afraid that it will not look good. Master, put on the earth, he is probably an academician level figure. General Cheng Wangqilai was ordered to form the janitor army, designated as Huban. This is a tiger knife specially developed for the Huban army. Xiao Zhongshui explained, "Master, you also know that the formation of the Imperial Guard by General Cheng Wanli is a matter of great concern to the sage, and there is no room for mistakes. So, this tiger knife, we would like to invite Master Zhu to give you the palm of his hand." After listening to Xiao Zongshui's explanation, Master Zhu looked a little slow, nodded and said, "Even so, just look for a caster for these standard weapons." Despite saying that, Master Zhu still picked up the secret casting recipe and looked at it carefully. "This idea is rather interesting." Master Zhu nodded slightly, and said, "Sacrifice a part of the firmness to make the sharpness of the knife almost the ultimate standard weapon. There are talents under Mr. Xiao. This casting recipe, no problem." Xiao Zhongshui asked. "The problem is not big." Master Zhu said, "According to the secret recipe, it is indeed possible to cast a sharp standard long knife, but what? Xiao Zhongshui asked. But there are not many apprentices who can cast a knife according to this casting secret recipe. Master Zhu said sharply, the casting skills used here can only be easily used by the casting division, and it is a bit more difficult for the casting apprentice. The knife is a good knife, but it is difficult to mass produce. Master Zhu, do you mean that there is no problem with casting the secret recipe, but the casting is too difficult? It can be understood that way. Master Zhu nodded, if you can ask a soldier to make a move, it will not be difficult to cast this tiger knife. Please cast a shot? Xiao Zhongshui smiled bitterly, which casting division would be bored to cast standard weapons? They just cast a handful of weapons that they can buy, the value of which can be comparable to hundreds of standard weapons. Even if Xiao Zhongshui has that face, it's not worth it. How much silver is a tiger knife? How much silver do you get for a shot? It's not a good deal. But Master Zhu, I do have soldiers casting apprentices who can cast tiger swords. Xiao Zhongshui does not give up. I said, the casting of this tiger knife is very difficult for the soldier casting apprentice, but I didn't say that the soldier casting apprentice can't do it. Master Zhu said, a better skilled apprentice can be cast after 3 or 5 years of training. Okay, there is no other problem, so let's do it, the old man will have important things in the future. Master Zhu waved to see off the guests. Xiao Zhongshui left Master Zhu's mansion in despair. He wanted to supply Cheng Wanli with weapons so much, not just to make the difference. As the chief of the workshop of the division of soldiers, although Xiao Zongshui's official position is not big, he has plenty of oil and water in his hands. Even those whose official positions are much larger than him may not be rich. He indulged in Cheng Wanli because Cheng Wanli is a popular man in front of the sage. The most important thing is that he is responsible for the formation of the Tiger Army, which is responsible for protecting the sage. They will appear in front of the Lord in the future. If their weapons are in the eyes of the sage, then the benefits to Xiao Zhongshui are self-evident. But now, if you can't forge 3,000 tiger swords in 3 months, Cheng Wanli will definitely be angry. If he changes to another workshop to supply weapons, he will be emptied by fetching water from the bamboo basket. It makes no sense. Xiao Zhongshui muttered to himself, Zhou Shu is not outstanding in the 97th workshop, why can he cast it, but others can't make it? There is no problem with casting the secret recipe. Could it be that Zhou Shu has other skills? Master Zhu is a master craftsman. Since he said that there is no problem in casting the secret recipe, then there is definitely no problem. Xiao Zhongshui didn't have the slightest doubt on this point, but he now suspects that Zhou Shu might have mastered a special casting technique. Otherwise, how could an apprentice who used to be a mediocre soldier forging suddenly be able to forge a tiger sword? Even Master Zhu has said that it is a bit difficult for the soldier casting apprentice to cast the tiger sword. Humph! What's the difficulty? I can't count the difficulties that Xiao Zhongshui has solved in my life. Since the secret recipe is okay, then I don't believe it. There are only 3,000 tiger knives, I can't handle it. Xiao Zhongshui rushed back to workshop number 97. As soon as he returned to the workshop, he immediately summoned the top apprentices in forging craftsmanship in workshop number 97. Zhou Shu was also called. When Zhou Shu rushed to the square, there were already 30 or 40 people crowded there. Those people were in groups of 3 or 5, all gathered together and whispering. Zhou Shu had no friends in the workshop, so he could only stand alone in the corner, listening to everyone's discussion quietly. Just when everyone was discussing what the principal was calling everyone for, Xiao Zhongshui had already arrived in the field. He coughed slightly. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com immediately calmed down. I called you today because you are all the best skilled apprentices in our number 97 workshop. Xiao Zhongshui scanned the audience and said, now there is a glorious task to entrust to you. This task is very important to our number 97 workshop, so no matter what, there can be no mistakes. You are all good soldiers and strong generals under this boss, I hope you can complete this task for this boss. Of course, I won't let you do anything in vain. Xiao Zhongshui glanced around the audience like a falcon. I put the words here, if I can complete the task this time, I will have many rewards. From now on, no matter who it is, as long as I can cast a weapon according to my secret recipe, I will reward you with a silver or 2 for every one cast. There was an uproar on the field, 1 or 2 silver, most of the apprentices for casting soldiers, there is no monthly salary of 1 or 2. There are only a few people, bowing their heads and not talking. They are the people who have been called by Xiao Zhongshui to cast soldiers before. So they know very well that this money is not so profitable. Those apprentices who don't understand the situation are getting excited. Forging a weapon and rewarding 1 or 2 silvers, it's equivalent to 1 month's wages, 2 or 3 for 1 day. Master, even if we are desperate, we will definitely complete the task. An apprentice forging soldiers shouted. Very good. Xiao Zhongshui nodded with satisfaction. The principal has other things to be busy with. Zhou Shu, you will be responsible for this matter. All the apprentices present will be temporarily led by you. Within 3 months, the principal will be responsible. You have to see 3,000 tiger swords, otherwise he. Zhou Shu looked wrong. He was here to make soy sauce. Okay, why did it suddenly get on him? Lord Xiao, I am too young and I am too junior, I am afraid that it will be difficult to take up the important task. Zhou Shu said. Nothing to do with courtesy, whoever rapes or steals. Xiao Zhongshui inexplicably pushed himself out, who knows what idea he made. After 3 months, I can't hand over 3,000 tiger swords, so I hum. I only take this kind of thing for myself when I'm full. Zhou Shu feels that his life is pretty good now. He casts 2 tiger swords at random every day, and then he just fishes if he wants to fish, and he practices if he wants to practice. It's just not too happy. Master in charge, Zhou Shu, a hairy boy, how can he take on this important task? In my opinion, Zhang Yibei is more suitable to be the person in charge. An apprentice forging soldiers said loudly. Zhou Shu gave him a thumbs up in his heart, it was a assist. Are you teaching me to do things? Xiao Zongshui's face sank, he glared at the soldier casting apprentice, and said coldly, Zhang Yibei, do you think so too? Zhang Yibei is a man in his 30s with a strong figure and dark skin. He has been working in workshop number 97 for more than 10 years, and he is considered one of the oldest people in the group. The skill of casting soldiers is definitely the first in workshop number 97. Zhang Yibei lowered his head and said in a dull voice, no, I will listen to the master's instructions. Hey, it's better. Xiao Zhongshui coldly snorted, if you let me know who is wrong and who has missed the major event of the principal will let you know, this 97th workshop, who has the final say. Listen to me, from now on, what Zhou Shu said is what I said. If anyone refuses to accept it, come to me. After saying that, without giving Zhou Shu any room to refuse, he flicked his sleeves and turned away. 3 months, I want to see 3,000 tiger swords. Xiao Zongshui's voice came from far away, and the audience became silent. Until Xiao Zongshui completely walked away, everyone's eyes fell on Zhou Shu's body. That Zhou Shu was numb by those eyes, scratched his head, and said, uncles and brothers, if you are the Lord Xiao, everyone just listen. Since the principal has ordered, I will naturally follow the order. Zhang Yibei said in a deep voice, Brother Zhou, if you have any instructions, just say so. Zhang Yibei is very prestigious among apprenticeships. Since he said so, some apprentices who originally had an angry face didn't make trouble for Zhou Shu. Zhou Shu sighed, he knew that Xiao Zongshui was not at ease. I am a young man, do I have any real power? Why do I suppress these old fritters? Don't look at what Zhang Yibei said nicely, if he really told him what to do, he wouldn't necessarily respond. Brother Zhang joked. The wood is done. If it really fails to complete the task, Xiao Zhongshui may not necessarily torture him. Zhou Shu can only go one step at a time. I can't talk about instructions, everyone is to complete the task arranged by Mr. Xiao. Brother Zhang, brother, I don't have much experience. I really have something to do. I have to trouble you for advice. Since you can't hide, let Xiao Zhongshui complete the task as soon as possible. Mr. Xiao asked us to cast 3,000 tiger swords in 3 months. We now have almost 40 hands. On average, one person needs to cast more than 70. Zhou Shu continued, 3 months, more than 70 hands, this task should not be difficult to complete. Zhang Yibei nodded and agreed. Everyone present, except Zhou Shu, Zhang Yibei are all familiar with them. They are all good hands among apprentices in the casting of soldiers. They usually cast standard long knives, and the workload of completing 4 or 5 in a day is not a problem. Although I have never heard of this tiger knife, it seems to Zhang Yibei that it is nothing. What can be handed over to them for casting is undoubtedly a standard weapon. More than 70 standard weapons were cast in 3 months, less than 1 a day on average. This kind of task is much easier than their usual work. I really don't know why Mr. Xiao is so exciting. Let's not assign tasks, everyone first come to see the secret recipe for casting soldiers, but they are illiterate, I will explain to you, afterwards, everyone will first cast and practice hands, and then we will assign tasks according to the actual situation. Zhou Shu said. Everyone naturally has no opinion, this is also a fairer approach. After all, everyone's strength is different, if the task amount is evenly divided, it is not a good way. Those who can work harder, put in work, they are capable, work more. Of course, this mission is a bit different, that is, for every weapon forged, there is a profit of 1 or 2 silver. In this case, everyone wants to split more tasks. Several people in the team shook their heads secretly. These people, I don't know what is waiting for them. Zhang Yibei was the first to walk towards the secret casting recipe left by Xiao Zhongshui. Zhou Shu didn't him. The secret recipe for casting was handwritten by him. What is there to snatch? Zhang Yibei is a veteran of casting soldiers. He quickly read the secret casting recipe, frowning, and looking at Zhou Shu and said, Brother Zhou, this casting secret recipe is not easy. I know. Zhou Shu nodded. You know. Zhang Yibei said puzzledly. I used to help Mr. Xiao cast a tiger knife. Zhou Shu did not say that he was the creator of the tiger knife. The apprentices who saw him try the knife at the beginning were all sealed by Xiao Zong, and they were not here. Zhou Shu was not worried about showing off. Have you helped Lord Xiao cast a tiger sword? Zhang Yibei was a little surprised and authentic. He was thinking, why didn't Mr. Xiao look for him? His level of casting soldiers is among the best in this number 97 workshop. Zhou Shu was thinking, how could this Yibei look mature and steady? Yet. Zhou Shu nodded, according to my experience, this tiger knife is more than twice as difficult to cast than an ordinary long knife. It is quite good to be able to cast one in 3 hours. Zhou Shu didn't notice. Several people in the crowd looked at him with shocked faces. Those few people were all called by Xiao Zhongshui to try to cast tiger swords, without exception, they all failed. Now that they hear that a little-known young man can succeed in casting, how can they not be shocked? Although they were shocked, they had their own minds and did not stand up and tell Zhang Yibei and others about their failure. Brother Zhang, you are a senior, and your casting skills are much higher than mine. You should be able to cast faster. Zhou Shu continued. A touch of contentment flashed in Zhang Yibei's eyes. Originally, he wanted to embarrass Zhou Shu for a while, but now that he is so good at talking, let it go. The big guy will study this secret recipe first, and I will try it out first. Zhang Yibei said loudly, looking like a big brother in the lead. The most indispensable thing in the workshop of caste soldiers is the place for ironing. Zhang Yibei did not return to his work shed, so he found a place nearby and started work. Ding ding dong dong, a group of apprentices for casting soldiers stepped forward to see the secret casting recipe. However, among the apprentices of casting soldiers, not many literate people, most of them still approached Zhou Shu and listened to him explain the secret recipe of casting. In the distance, where everyone can't see, Xiao Zongshui retracted his gaze, feeling a little proud. Playing with the boss, now, the boss depends on how you guard your skills. If you can't complete the task, the boss has some methods to concoct you. Xiao Zongshui sneered twice, no longer to see Zhou Shu and others, turned around and went into his room. Let's write down the secret recipe first, and now let's take a look at Zhang's demonstration. The secret recipe for casting is not long, and all of them are veterans of casting soldiers, and they quickly wrote down the secret recipe for casting soldiers. Zhou Shu greeted everyone to Zhang Yibei's foundry shed and said loudly. Zhang Yibei saw the crowd watching. Not only was he not embarrassed, but on the contrary, he became more vigorous, and the hammer was a little bit faster than before. Seeing Zhang Yibei's movements, Zhou Shu's brows wrinkled insignificantly. Zhang Yibei is a senior soldier casting apprentice, and he is very skilled in casting soldiers. He almost strictly follows the casting secret recipe of the tiger sword. Just fell in the eyes of Zhou Shu, with a specious feeling, how to put it, there is no God. Yes, it's tangible and godless. Although Zhou Shu's current casting level is not bad, his foundation is relatively weak. For a while, it is impossible to determine what is wrong with Zhang Yibei's casting. Click. Just when Zhou Shu was thinking about what was wrong with Zhang Yibei's casting, there was a soft sound, and everyone's discussion stopped abruptly. Zhang Yibei's movements were also stagnant in the air, his face was full of surprise. Failed. Zhang Yibei couldn't believe it. Reading www.yuyuganshu.com, he has been casting standard weapons all his life. It can be said that he can cast a standard long knife with his eyes closed. This tiger knife, although it looks a bit complicated, is still a standard long knife. Zhang Yibei couldn't believe it because he had failed. Half of the casting, the knife blank broke. Among the crowd, the faces of the experienced people flashed with such a look, they were also the same at the beginning, and they couldn't figure out why it was so. I will try again. Zhang Yibei was also fierce, he threw a piece of iron into the stove again unconvinced. Ding ding dong dong. After half an hour, Zhang Yibei looked at the broken blade again, and he felt a little bad. This time, he has been more careful, every step is strictly according to the casting secret recipe, but why? Why is it still not working? There is a problem with this casting recipe. Zhang Yibei said loudly, this tiger knife cannot be cast. Zhou Shu said that he helped Mr. Xiao cast one. In the crowd, I don't know who said a word in a low voice. Dozens of eyes fell on Zhou Shu again. Zhou Shu had a thoughtful look on his face, and he didn't panic under everyone's gaze. Instead, he opened his mouth and said, Brother Zhang, there is no problem with casting the secret recipe, but you have a problem. I have a problem. Zhang Yibei was furious. When I started to cast soldiers, you were still using urine and mud. It doesn't matter how long it takes to cast soldiers. Zhou Shu shook his head and said calmly, give me the hammer, I'll show it to you, and then tell you what your problem is.